keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but Thee, dear Lord, none but Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely.
All right. So verses 22 through 25 is the first little section that we'll deal with, which is a significant section in today's environment. There's some significant guidance that we can take from this. So keep in mind, as I mentioned a moment ago, he's talking about the laws on violence. He's dealt with various punishments for various acts of violence, and this is a continuation of that. And he says, if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a miscarriage, yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband made demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. All right, so we're talking about a struggle that has some collateral damage. That collateral damage is there's a woman who's expecting a child, and the two that are fighting, whether intentional or not, the implication here is that there's no intent at all, that they're fighting amongst themselves, and by sheer happenstance, this woman is struck, and that causes her to deliver prematurely, to miscarry. He's setting forth some regulations and some things to consider. If there is a miscarriage but no further damage, now what does that mean, miscarriage with no further damage? Okay, the child is not injured. If there's a miscarriage with no further damage, then it's basically just a civil case like we have in our own justice system today. I injure, let's say, Angel, and Wesley sues, and he demands some monetary amount. It goes before a judge. The judge decides whether or not that's a reasonable request, and some resolution is made, whether it be through settlement or actually a full-blown trial, and a fixed amount is determined, and that is what I'm required to pay. It's the exact same thing here. The man says, hey, You've done this thing, you've hurt me and my family. This is what it's going to take to make me right. It goes before the judges, and the judges say, that's reasonable. You need to pay the man. Or they say, that's a little excessive. You need to pay him this instead. Or, who knows, he may even say, that's not a reasonable amount. The injury is great enough that it's worthy of much greater payment than that, and may even adjust it going forward. But the idea is that there is an adjudication and some fixed amount is created. Does God prescribe the amount? No. Might it be different in one case from another? Might it be different in one place from another? All those things are true. That's okay. There is this concept of just finding what it takes to set someone right in your circumstances, which include place and time and everything else. Some places, that kind of damage may actually be greater in cost than other places. It's more expensive to live in some places than other places. And so that's what he provides for here. I'm convinced that much of common law, which is the basis of most of American law, much of common law arises from these principles, and that's where we get our common system today. But he says, if there is further injury. Now, what's the further injury under consideration? Okay. If there's some kind of permanent damage. So in the first case, there's just a strike and the baby's delivered, but everyone's okay. The baby lives. Babies can do that. They can be born early and survive. The mother is not permanently damaged in any way. Okay, it's just a monetary exchange. But if there's further damage of any type, then there is going to be a cost assessed based upon what? What kind of damage it was. If the mother or the child were to die, he says life for life. Now, what's important about this in our current circumstances is we have an in utero child that is being weighed with the exact same value as a living person walking on the streets. If that baby dies as a result of the miscarriage, the person who caused it forfeits his life. Life for life. If there's some subsequent injury that's less, then the punishment is meted out accordingly. This eye for eye, tooth for tooth thing, we tend to think of it as kind of being barbaric. We've all studied, usually in English class of all places, the places in the world where people had their hands chopped off for being thieves, or their eyes put out for something, or let's say they lied and they get their tongue cut out. And we think, man, that's barbarous. In truth, what God is doing is limiting the punishment. Okay, so think about this in terms of, you remember what happens after Cain has killed his brother Abel, and he's cast away and he's wandering the earth, and he said that he was going to avenge himself what? 7 times. That eventually, a few generations later, we find a man bragging that if Cain's avenged 7 times, then he's going to be avenged 77 times. And braggadocio claims like, I killed a man for striking me. Okay, that is the kind of justice that men look for. You damage me in some way, I want to exact vengeance on you that punishes you much worse. than the damage that you caused me. God says no. It has to be equal justice. If it's a life that you've cost, then you forfeit your life. The rest of this is not a prescribement of a particular type of punishment. To my knowledge, the Jews never did chop off anyone's hands because someone's hand was injured, but is a general statement that says you can't exact more in the name of justice than the damage that is done. So there's two principles there. One of those principles is generally still believed and held and practiced even in our own legal system today. We generally say that the punishment should fit the crime when we're talking about criminal things. We have provisions against cruel punishments or unusual punishments that should not be exacted on someone, that it should be a reasonable punishment for the offense. That is also a similar standard in civil law that says, look, you can have damages, but those damages should be commensurate with the cost. Now, there are punitive damages that are awarded sometimes. Sometimes those are double, sometimes those are treble, sometimes, well, I don't think there's any in our circumstances that go beyond that, but there is actually in the scriptures, and we'll see that in a moment, that there is some more than even 3-time punitive type damages. But anyway, that's not allowed. It's generally held and continue to be held today. The first principle from this, which is that the life of an unborn child is equal to the life of any living grown human being, is not currently held by many, many, many people in our society, or by many, many, many people in our justice system, or by our laws. Now, I say that qualified because if the mother and father desire the child and the life is ended, then that is treated as if that life had full value of life, and someone is guilty of murder. In fact, if you kill a pregnant person, more likely than not, you're going to be charged with double murder in most jurisdictions. But if the mother doesn't want the child, we've created a whole nother class, and we do not view this principle as being applicable universally. I want to make something clear here and notice that this is a complete accidental situation. There is no intent. And even under an accidental situation with no intent, if you cause the death of an unborn child, it's murder. I think that we could learn something from that. I think the value that we should hold for life should reflect that. So this has a very practical and timely application to us. It's extremely reasonable in the way it's laid out. And again, God's not going through every single law. He is setting forth the general parameters. Later on in this book, there's going to be more detail about various aspects of all sorts of things that are mentioned here, very briefly. This is more detailed than what happened in chapter 20, which set forth basically the commandments in 10 ordinances. And it's more detailed than what Jesus would teach, which was generally that all of the commandments, every one of them, can be summed up with 2 laws. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you do both of those things, he said, you're not going to cross the law. So all of these things arise from those 2 principles. This is a reflection of both of those laws. when you forfeit your life because you wantonly take another life, it is a reflection both of the love of God and of the love of man. The love of God, because man's created in the image of God. The love of man, because his life is worth something. That's the case with all of these laws. So as you're reading through this and you're seeing these laws, just ask yourself, wait a minute, how does this fit into that paradigm of love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, love your neighbors yourself? And then once you figure that out, then you understand the principles that you can take out of this that still apply today. Does the idea of, have I covered it yet? I don't think I have. I think I'm going to be doing it in just a little while. Well, I'll use this one. Does the idea of stoning someone for cursing his parents, is that applicable today? Are we bound by that? No. Is there a principle from that we're bound by? Honor your parents. Children, obey your parents. The idea of respecting parents. By the way, go ahead. If you can't respect your parents, what follows? You can't respect God. Because it was God who created the relationship and God who said, honor your parents. And the reason he said that was to train us to honor him. Just like John argues in 1 John that if you don't love man whom you see and interact with on a daily basis, you can't love God whom you can't see. If you don't respect those that you owe respect to and honor them and honor their authority, then you don't respect, honor, and honor the authority of God. Which is also why the same thing is applied to the marriage relationship in the book of Ephesians. That the reason why a wife should be submissive to her husband is for the sake of God, not because the husband is worthy of it, but because God deserves it. And so it is the love of God that's at the root of those things. We can take that away and understand that that means anytime that I disrespect humans and I don't value them the way that they ought to value, what am I also doing? Disrespecting God and not valuing God the way that I ought to. Now, the inverse of that is actually taught by Jesus, right? He says, if you give a cup of cold water in my name to someone, you've done it to me. If you fed someone that's hungry, you've done it to me. Anytime you do these things to the least of these, my children, you've done it unto me, he teaches. So the inverse is correct, or is true. And the reverse is true. That means that if I disrespect, or I lack love for, or I don't appreciate the authority of some human authority that God has ordained, then I lack respect and authority for God. That's the takeaway. That's the lesson that we can learn from studying these things. All right, verses 26 and 27. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. So what's that? What's that saying? So, yeah, if you're careless with these people who are working for you, with your servants, that's indicative of you viewing them as what? As chattel, as property. Maybe even less valued than property. Because if my car gets dented, I get kind of sick to my stomach. But not everybody got that way about their servant. There was a time in this country that if one died in the field, they were just left there. We'll get one to replace him. That ought not be. He says, look, here's that. He doesn't say to the master, okay, eye for eye means you injured his eye, so now I'm going to put your eye out. No, he says the eye for eye justice in this case is he injured his eye, so what does he get? Freedom. He doesn't owe you anything. Nobody has to redeem him. He doesn't have to wait for the 6 years to pass. He's free to go. His life is restored back to him. His freedom is restored back to him because you injured his eye. You failed to respect him. You failed to care for him. He's now free to go. Verse 27, if he knocks out a tooth of his male or female slave, he shall let him go, free on account of his tooth. So eye for eye, tooth for tooth, again, doesn't mean that I pull the owner's tooth. It means that he goes free. So people misunderstand and misapply this concept of life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, all these things. All he is saying is that there is going to be a proper and just. And if you're not providing care, you're not concerned with the well-being, then they don't have to stay under your charge. And you don't get any benefit from them. You don't get to sell them to someone else, or you don't get to have their family redeem them and get profit off of that. No. You haven't cared for them, so they're free to go. This is very similar to what he said about the slave that you've married that you're not satisfied with and you don't treat them properly anymore. And he set down 3 very specific things that you had to continue to provide for them. And if you don't do it, what do you say? They're free to go. You respect them and provide the care that they deserve, or you just lose. That's the principle here. All right, verses 28 through 32 starts dealing with what my obligations are in management of my livestock and the people around me. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. All right, so you've got an ox. Oxes have horns. Things happen. Animals do things. Animals do not reason and think. I promise you, the ox doesn't say, hey, there's a person and I don't like him and I'm going to go gore him. Circumstances comes up where it feels threatened and it instinctively reacts by throwing a horn. That's how it protects itself. And if you happen to be standing there, it goes through you. All right, this is an accident. This was not done on purpose. So he says the ox is to be stoned to death. Again, this simply says that life had value, even though it was an accident. God wanted everyone to know that the life had value. So the ox is to die, but he goes further than that and says what? You don't eat it. You don't get any profit from this exchange. Everybody loses. You do not eat the flesh, but the owner goes unpunished. The owner hasn't done anything. The owner has just owned an animal. And by the way, our laws, our civil laws, do in fact follow this concept. Not exactly, but closely. If, however, an ox was previously in the habit of goring. Now, there's 2 things that are important. Previously. That indicates what? You know. Previously means you know. You have knowledge. It's in the habit. That's the other important word. Not just that it did it once a long time ago and it hasn't done it again, and this is, no, it's in the habit of doing it. It happens with some expectation and regularity. Maybe it's not always people. Maybe it fights with your other oxen. Maybe it slams into your fence constantly, fighting. You know it's a dangerous animal. You know that it is prone to goring, and the owner has been warned. So I have this knowledge. I can't even say, well, I didn't realize that I have my servants taking care of the animals, and I had no idea. No, you've been warned. They've come to you and said, hey, this one is a problem. You've been warned, yet he does not confine it. In other words, you have to do something. If you got a dog in our society, and that dog is prone to bite, you have an obligation to keep it caged up, leashed up, controlled, so that it cannot harm other people. If you get bit, well, that's on you. But you can't let it get free and bite your neighbors. You can't let it bite the mailman. You can't let it bite the guy that's coming up to read the gas meter. You can't let it bite the water meter guy. You can't let it bite the guy that's trying to serve you your service papers for court purposes when you're sued. No, you can't do that. You can't have it biting the police when they're trying to come. No, you're under an obligation. And if it does that, then there are some consequences. You're held responsible. It's the same thing here. You have knowledge, you have warning, but you don't do anything to stop it. And it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall be put to death. And what I would suggest to you here is what God is doing is holding both the animal and the owner responsible for their distinctive roles in the situation. Human life is more valuable than animal life. So if a human life is taken by an animal, he said, put the animal down. And not only did he say put the animal down, but since I was an oxen in this case, put the animal down, and you can't even eat the meat. But if you knew about it, you had a responsibility to control the animal, you didn't control the animal, now you're culpable for the death as well. And that's one of the problems that we have. And by the way, the clock is stopped. So somebody in the room, it's what, 34 after right now. There is a culpability, and you're going to be held responsible. And we have a tendency to say guilt. When we talk about things happening, we want to place 100% of guilt on one thing. Doesn't work that way. And in this case, what I would tell you is we have two things that are 100% guilty. Both the ox and the owner. And it's not 50-50 guilt. Both of them are completely guilty, having not met the responsibility. The owner is guilty. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give it for the redemption of his life, whatever is demanded of him. So there is a way out for the owner. What would that way out be? The mercy of the family of the one that was harmed. You notice this is an if proposition. This is not a this is what must happen. If the family doesn't grant a redemption prize, then you get killed. But if the family has mercy and says, you know what, instead of killing, you can buy his life and places some value on it, he says you can do that. That is essentially what God did with the firstborn of all Israelites. The firstborn child belonged to who? To God. But did God take those children? No, he left them with the family, but what did they have to do? They had to offer a sacrifice in his place. They had to pay a ransom, which was teaching us about our own lives being ransomed by the Lord. This is a subtext way in which he can underscore this idea of a ransom being offered that can be sufficient enough to redeem our lives, which is exactly what he had planned for dealing with man in sin. Whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're talking about a child or an adult. Same rules apply. Any questions so far? I'm going to try real quick in the few minutes we have left to get through at least this next one, verses 33 through 36, get us to the end of the chapter. If a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it over, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall give money to the owner, and the dead animal shall become his. All right, so we got a big hole in front of the building right here. I don't know if y'all noticed it coming in. Did y'all notice anything else about that big hole? It's not covered, but it's taped off with yellow tape so that no one walking across there falls into the hole. Now, if someone does, by the way, if it stays uncovered overnight, and someone does fall in there despite the fact that there's tape over it, there's a potential civil litigation that could happen. The primary responsibility falls on people that have opened the hole. But just so you know, we could get pulled into it too. We probably would, because it's on our property. But anyway, this same principle, it's the exact same. You do something that creates a dangerous situation, you have a responsibility to mitigate that danger. So he says, cover the hole over so someone's ox doesn't fall in. If somebody's ox falls into it, breaks its neck and dies, you pay the man for the ox, you now have a dead ox. He can go buy a living ox with the money you just gave him, and he's got a new ox. You got an old dead ox. That's what you get. If the ox gores, I skipped did I skip 32? I don't know, doesn't matter. It's still ox and gores, and we covered that pretty thoroughly. If a man opens a pit, digs it, does not cover it, and an ox or donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution, he shall give money, and the dead animal shall become his. And if one man's ox hurts another's, that's another ox, so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide its price equally, and also they shall divide the dead ox. Now, why divide the dead ox? Because they're going to eat it. That's exactly right. So you sell the living one, divide up the money, you take the dead one, you take all the valuable meat that's there, and you divide it up. And each person gets, so in other words, what you're doing is you're taking these two people with these two animals, and you are splitting the difference between them. Or, if it is known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not confined it, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and this is an ox goring a neighbor's animal, and you know that it tends to do that. He shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall become his. So the same thing. If one of your animals kills somebody else's animal, you got to pay for it, and you get a dead animal for it. Now, you're paying the full value of a living animal. You're getting a dead animal. And there is some punitive built into that says, look, you know what? If you know your animal is likely to do this, you have a responsibility to keep it away from your neighbor's animals. And if you don't, then it's going to cost you. And we do something similar, by the way. If somebody's cow happens to wander into the middle of the street and you hit it and kill it with your car, you're liable for the value of the cow, potentially. Right. If you are hunting and you mistake someone's cow for a deer and you shoot the cow, you got to pay the guy for the beef. It's the same general concept that's being applied here. So anyway, that gets us to chapter 22, and next time we'll start looking at what we'll call property laws. That starts with some discussion about theft, and we'll go through to discussions about damage. So appreciate everybody's presence and participation.
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea.